This week, we're speaking to an internationally renowned expert with regard to retirement and aging. We're going to learn, and this is important for you, how you have to think about what you might do to change your lifestyle if something happens, if there are life events, if you're somehow unwell, or what if your kids move back in with you. So Dr. Amy, who you will meet in a few moments, will have a lot of bits of information for you to help you make better wealth decisions with regard to aging in place and moving on with your life when life throws you a curveball. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast dedicated to helping pre-retirees and retirees manage risk and economic uncertainty by adopting a pension-style approach to improve your risk-return trade-off. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. This week, we're speaking with Amy Dupree. She is an internationally respected expert on lifestyle issues relating to retirement, aging, caregiving, and family dynamics. She's got a PhD in social work, and Dr. Amy provides down-to-earth, practical, and professionally informed guidance on life transitions. She has worked with thousands of advisors over the past 20 years, and it's my pleasure to welcome her to the podcast. Amy, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, John.
Let's talk about life transitions. When a major transition hits, a lot of people are convinced they can handle it, but that's not always what happens. So why is there often a disconnect between what people think they're going to be able to handle and what life actually throws at them?
Well, and to define what we mean when we say life transitions, I say it's the stages, changes, events, and life quakes that we all go through it throughout the life cycle. And a lot of times, John, especially if we look at midlife and beyond, so some of these are things like retirement and caregiving, even some of the issues around estate planning and those sort of things. You know, what happens is people think that they don't need to necessarily prepare for these things. And so they get shocked when it actually happens. And I will say, John, a lot of it is we don't know what we don't know. So, you know, caregiving is a perfect example of that, right? People don't really know what they're getting into until suddenly their parent needs care or their spouse needs care. And so they haven't likely done a lot of preparation ahead of time. And then it can really knock them off their feet.
And that can have a major impact on, for instance, your retirement planning, because you think you've got your retirement all mapped out and you've done the planning and you've run the numbers. And then you think, now I'm going to have to spend all this additional money for mom or dad because they're in a home or because they're going to have certain things that need to be done as accommodations to make sure that they can maintain their quality of life. So all of these things carry some real emotional weight.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering about how that weight helps to shape financial decision making. And can people still make decisions with a clear head and steely-eyed, focused on the priorities that they had before these things happen?
They can. I think this is where, though, I'm a big proponent of people doing a little bit of planning. And I know planning isn't a word that really makes people excited, right? We're going to sit and plan all weekend. That's not what we say. But I think this is the idea of how. I always say life and money go hand in hand. So these things we're talking about on the life side have direct implications on the financial. We were talking about caregiving, but it could be boomerang kids who move back home. And suddenly look at what that does to retirement plans. And so how do you I say each of these transitions have 4 implications: practical, emotional, family, and financial. So they all work together. So yes, if I'm dealing with a life transition and I'm dealing with likely emotional, practical, and family things, can I still make good financial decision? Yes, it helps if you have a great advisor who knows you as a person and not just about your money. That makes a big difference and is able to kind of walk beside you as you're going through different transitions.
That's great. Okay, so it's one of those things where, a lot of advisors, I have a lot of clients tell me that my job, they see me as being a bit of an emotional therapist. I had a meeting with clients just this past week, and I just said, "You've made it." And they went, "Thank you for just telling us what we needed to hear." And I mean, they were beyond having made it. But unless and until someone tells them that, people still feel a little bit antsy. So, okay, let's talk about something that I talk about, and I want to get your take. I have written a fair bit about optimism bias over the past.
Yes.
In fact, my book, Bullshift, which is there over my corner, hat over the corner of my shoulder, that has a subtitle of How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. But I'm wondering if something similar might show up with regard to life planning and people underestimating what retirement or caregiving might actually look for. and what that would actually take out of them emotionally and
Mhm.
financially. We've talked about it already, but maybe go into some detail now.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about it too, John. If we talk about, I like to talk about retirement in three chapters. And what I always say is there's no magic to the three, but it gets people thinking beyond retirement is one long stage. It could be 10 chapters. But what we know is it changes and it evolves, right? And so we also know that people tend to be very optimistic about what's going to happen in the future. And they make plans for things to go right. And they often don't have a plan B. So I have a plan B question I really like that helps people think about this differently, which is if there were a shift in my health or mobility or the health or mobility of someone I love, what might I do differently? And by asking that question, you look at housing, you look at how you're spending your time in a realistic way, and it gets out of this, everything's fine, everything's fine. And then what happens, we know, John, is that people make a lot of decisions in crisis that end up not being what they maybe would have really wanted.
So I love that because my book is called Bull Shift, and your
Yeah.
question actually said if there was a shift, and then from
Yeah.
there, and the point of the question is, without using it, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but only very slightly, where your situation, which was bullish, your outlook was
Yep.
bullish, and now it's not quite as good as you thought. What would you? So may I borrow your question?
Please do. And can I
Okay,
give you a real life example of it? Because I can
sure.
give you, there's tons of them I could give you, but it's always nice to give one about my parents because that's where I kind of came up with that question. My mom had a massive stroke after my parents spent 9 fantastic years in retirement, and they lived 17 miles outside of town in a retirement community that they loved. But after my mom rehabbed, we couldn't get her back to that house. And my dad was super stressed out because my mom no longer could weigh in on that decision. And he kept saying, I wished we talked about what we would have wanted if we couldn't stay here. I
Uh,
hope I'm doing what she would have wanted. And that's when I realized, John, these questions are things we all need to ask. And I know people say, oh, but I don't want to think about, all the things that can go wrong. And my answer to that is you don't have to, but you can have that question. And it doesn't mean if you say, if there were a shift in my health or mobility, what might I do differently? And you look around your house and you think, this wouldn't be a good place to live. You don't have to put a for sale sign up, but what you need is, what would you want? What would you want? And then you need to talk to the people you love so they know it. And that way, if something does change, you maintain choice, control, independence, and you have the best quality of life. And that's what we all want.
so that leads me right into a question that I was going to ask, which is a lot of advisors are the first people to get the call when there's a
Yeah.
change. And I'm wondering what advisors can do as a form of a prophylactic to get in front of it
Yeah.
so that people can feel comfortable opening up and talking about what those changes might entail.
Love that. And first of all, I think it's a great role for the advisor, especially as we look forward, is for the advisor to be the person that helps, and I often say helps wake up their clients gently, right? In these ways. And a lot of times advisors will say to me, but I don't want to upset my client or I don't want to, bring up things they don't want to talk about. So my favorite 3 words advisors can use are in my experience. So in my
Uh-huh.
experience and working with clients who've gone through all stages of retirement, what I've seen is they move through the later stages. There were some things they wish they'd thought about. And I know these things aren't always fun to talk about, but I want to make sure you, Mr. Ms. Client, have the best quality of life possible. So in order to do that, there's some things we should probably discuss. Are you okay with that? You get the client's permission, you've told them why you're asking, and then people relax and usually are quite happy to have the conversation.
It's funny because there's a lot of similarity between what you just said and estate planning and trying to get
Yes.
clients to open up about
Yep.
getting their will written and
That's
making sure
right.
they have powers of attorney in place and giving some thought to who the executor or executrix might be and whether or not you're going to set up a trust for the kids and
All
who'll be
that
the
good stuff.
guardian and all those things. Those are all things
Yep.
that are vitally important, but a little bit delicate because
Yep.
there are some people who actually think that if I talk about it, it somehow accelerates the likelihood of it
Yeah.
happening. When in fact, like no one knows, but you need to think about how life can throw a curveball at you. All right, so
That's
there's
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I got to say the curveball thing is what I say to people. And I just had this conversation about life insurance with a younger niece of mine who just had a baby and they don't have life insurance. And I said, you know, I know this isn't something you want to think about or talk about, but the time to do that is when everything's going well.
Yeah.
And this is where the advisor, this to me is one of the best roles that an advisor can play, is to help people in a gentle way, help them be prepared for these things.
Yeah, and I'll even put a more of a finer point on it. One of those, let's say you're in a situation where there's a husband and wife, and the husband is the breadwinner, and the wife is
Yep.
pregnant with their first child, and they'll say, "Well, we don't need insurance yet. Our child isn't born." You need insurance the moment she's pregnant,
That's right.
because you've got a dependent. It's just a fetus. You've still got a dependent, and you need to make sure that you've accounted for that immediately. So just one of those
Absolutely.
little things that people don't often think about. There's a well-known pattern of people changing advisors within the first
Yeah.
year of losing their spouse. And what's going on there? Why does that happen? And is it a good thing, or what?
Well, I think it happens because oftentimes the advisor hasn't built a strong enough relationship. It's usually a woman who leaves. And if the meetings aren't relevant to so I always say whether the woman's the CFO of the family or she's not engaged in the money, she's engaged in the life of the family. So if you're just doing portfolio reviews and talking numbers and you're not making the life money connection and talking about these things, this is where you often lose a lot of women clients specifically, and they don't feel that the advisor gets them and that the meetings aren't relevant. So the time to fix that is long before that spouse dies, because they leave because they don't have a relationship that is deep enough. And so they go to their friends or their kids' advisors and develop that relationship.
It's funny because, and I've told the story at least once before, many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, as a Thanksgiving gift to my clients, I would say, you tell me whatever charity you want to give money to. You send the check to me. I will match it, and I will send both checks to the charity so that you double your impact. What I found was interesting was that there were couples where I never heard from the female spouse. And
Yep.
all the questions at the meetings, they would both come to the meetings, and 100% of the questions were with the male. And I would try to
Yep.
engage the female. I have to tell you, Amy, 100% of those checks that were going to charity were signed by the female spouse,
There you
with
go.
no exceptions, with no
Yep.
exceptions. So they have priorities. They were more concerned about how the pie is going to be divided rather than growing it to be as big as possible. And that's a legitimate
That's right.
concern. Yeah.
Yep. That's right.
And
And how is it gonna, how are we gonna be okay as we age? And all the life questions that are tied to money.
so let's talk about life questions then. So there's a lot of people who do what I do for a living to talk about maximizing financial welfare,
Yep.
but not a lot of questions are around the non-financial questions that are lifestyle that might have a curveball. So, what would you say? How would you start those conversations, and what would be the most important things that need to be covered off once they start?
Well, one of the things we know, for example, about, let's take retirement, because everybody does retirement planning, is if you think about what are people going to do to sustain purpose and meaning in their life? Okay, we know once the money's taken care of, the next biggest concern people have in retirement is, do I have enough purpose and meaning, and who am I now without my career? And what I always say, as an advisor, you don't have to become a therapist. You can stay in your lane. You just have to be the connected human being you are. But instead of saying, what are you going to do in your retirement? One little twist to that question is, talk to me about the three most important things in your retirement that you want to do. And I'll tell you, I had an advisor who used this question, said he had this guy who sat there and said to him, that's a great question. We talk about travel, and he happened to be a big golfer, I mean, it's very stereotypical, but it was the actual conversation. And the guy said, I think about golf and vacationing. I haven't really moved beyond that. So when you asked me about three, I realized I need to think a little bit more about what my life's going to be like. They had a quick conversation. He went home, guy talked to his wife, opened up a whole other conversation. That's how you deepen relationships and your clients start thinking about things differently. It doesn't have to be that you have to go into a long conversation, but a well-placed story or a well-placed question can make all the difference. Caregiving, thinking about, again, that the idea in aging is the plan B question. is to throw that out. Just want to throw this out. It's a great question that may help you think about it. And then for caregiving, you say, can you picture in your future anyone that you love potentially needing care and how that could impact your life and your finances? And would you potentially be helping to pay for anyone's care? And if people say no, what they need to look at too is if they have aging parents who live a long way away, they may be spending a lot of money on traveling to that person. They may not be paying for the care, but they may have to cut back on their work. They may have to travel. So getting people to just think realistically about the circle of people most important to them and how changes in their health could make a difference in their financial plan too.
So we've covered a fair bit of ground, but I'm hypersensitive to the fact that there are a lot of things that I don't know. So when you start talking about lifestyle issues in retirement, what are the maybe one or two things that you would say are most important considerations for lifestyle changes that we haven't discussed about yet in this conversation? Because I can't help but think that we're still overlooking a few things.
Well, I'll tell you the thing that I think sometimes I get asked, what has the potentially the most negative impact on someone's quality of life as they age? And it's not matching their housing to their life stage and to their needs. And so people are very unrealistic about where they live and how that will work if they start having serious health changes. So I think getting people to just think about if 90% of Canadians want to stay in their own home. That's okay, but is your home easy to retrofit? Is this something we should be building into the financial plan? Do you need to put an elevator in? Do you need a stair lift? Is it realistic where you're living to make those changes? Or would you want to choose something else? Just that conversation alone to get people thinking about, again, if things change, they often change quickly. And the beauty of giving a little bit of pre-thought means that you're more likely to get what you want. And it ties directly to their financial planning, right? So it's a great conversation. That's the one I wish everybody would have.
Okay, I'm glad I asked. All right, so the podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. And I always end with this question. If it was up to you, Dr. Amy Dupree, what advice would you give people to help them make better wealth decisions?
I think the biggest advice I give is to think about your future in the standpoint of not things just going perfectly, but if there were shifts and you don't have to think about everything bad, and then have what I call essential conversations, talking to the most important people about the most important things in our lives, whether it's your spouse or partner, or it could be your siblings or your friends, but let people know what you want and have those conversations, because it's the lack of communication that often blows things up during caregiving and when the estate is read.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Amy. It's been a real pleasure. I want to wish you all the best in all that you do.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
If you're worried about the current investment climate in your money, go to my website to book a call for personalized advice to assist you in feeling secure and protected about your retirement.